Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Foundry. After the last few videos where I've been sort of talking about some of the mechanics of the game, I thought in this one it'd be nice to have a bit of a look round the factory that I've built and talk about how things have come together and why and where and how and what I've been doing. So, this is the starting pod. You drop in from space in a little pod here and you get started. And there was a nice helpful iron patch here which I've completely demolished, and similarly a copper patch over here which once again is now completely gone because I've dug all of those up and used the resources for important other things. But that enabled me to get a good start going from here, and I then I was able to smelt in some iron along here, and I've still got some steel smelting left over here from previously. Then that was brought over to this sort of area here where I started on making a large mall area. And this reminds me quite a bit of playing the Angel Bobs mod in Factorio, because where in vanilla Factorio and also in space exploration, you tend to find every building you need to make ends up taking different inputs in order to make it, just to keep things challenging. In Angel Bobs and also in this one, you tend to get sort of tiers of buildings. So the first tier of buildings took in relatively simple ingredients like iron and copper, and also the basic components, which I'm building in a couple of machines here, and the basic electrical components, which I'm making in a few more machines over here. So this stripe of machines along my mall, running along here, we're able to make all of the first tier of machines, I think is probably a good way to put it. So this has got things like the basic belts, we've got inserters, we've got assemblers, we've got the various other things that go with the belts like ramps and splitters and so on, mining drills, smelters, all the sort of basic stuff to get my factory up and running. Then after that we got onto the next tier where we started to use things like steel and the advanced components along here. And so because initially I could only have two belts running down each side of each machine because I only had short inserters and medium inserters, it made sense to then have a second row of machines running along here, able to take in steel, and apparently there were pipes that went into a lot of stuff along here, and also something else that there doesn't seem to be any of, which is a little bit concerning. Have we run out of something along here? It doesn't look like it. I think I might have just moved things around a bit. And so this sort of extended along down here, and as we got a bit further along, I think I developed the long inserters as well, like this one here. So we've got along here, we've got options of pipes, advanced components and steel, and then over on the other side we've still got the basic components and the electronics components, and that allowed me to make most of this what I'm thinking of as tier 2 machines at this point. And these include things like all the plumbing systems over there. We've got lava smelters and freight elevators, casting machines, pump jacks, the slightly more advanced machinery that went into the next tier of construction. And then after that, I then moved on to my third tier along here, where I seem to have brought in some electronic components back because there are some weird builds that required those as well. But then we've got things like green circuits and plastic, and then some more iron, because unfortunately lots of things over here needed iron. So the divisions aren't quite as neat as I was originally implying. It wasn't just that this tier took in these components, the middle tier took in the next ones, and so on as we went across. There were a few things that were required in between to make some of the more advanced recipes that little bit more complicated. And then there were a few other funny bits and pieces as well. So making assembly machine 2s down here required assembly machine 1s, and so I ended up bringing those on a long belt that sort of spaghettied its way out from in here, and then brings them all the way over to here. Eventually I wised up to the fact that a lot of my second tier of machines were going to require first tiers, and so over here I started to do things in a slightly more advanced way, where I'm making basic belts that are being fed out to make basic belt ramps and basic belt splitters, and then onto the second tier of belts, and then onto the third tier of belts, and those are all being passed through on these belts that go across the middle here, with the little ramps going up and down to take them across. And that's a little bit fiddly because it's quite difficult to squeeze all of that in here, but I have more or less managed it with a couple of slightly larger gaps than I would ideally have liked to have along here. I've done the similar thing over here where I'm making a small smelter, and then over here we're making large smelters, and over here as well I've got the same sort of thing for the mining drills, and I think these are the assembler 3s are now being made over here. So we've got this nice sort of telescopic recipe thing going on, and with this better design here, this is now nice and neat, and it doesn't have quite the same sort of ridiculous belts that we have going over the top here. That said, having the ridiculous belts going across the top here was quite fun, and I don't entirely regret it. But then there's a few other weird things that are being brought through. So we're bringing in one of the oil products here because it's needed for the pistons. We're bringing in energy cells along here, at least when there's some on the belt, and then they're being passed over here because they're needed for a mid-tier recipe. And so there are enough exceptions to make things a little bit weird, and that's part of the reason we've got this belt snaking around here, and to spaghetti the place up a little bit. But mostly I've managed to be reasonably organised, reasonably at least. And so having this mall area has allowed me to make all of the machines that I need to then go off and do other things. And so the next area I started to branch out into was over here, where I'm making science packs. And this is a very, very Factorio style system. You'll see I've got the inputs running along here, and then machines making things off those, and then spitting the outputs out along the next belt. And over here even more so, because I've got another row here making the whatever the first thing is that's needed to go into these machines. It looks like its foundation is one recipe, and then tier 1 belts, and then they're being passed over to another set of machines over here. And if I look at it from above, you can see this is very much the same sort of system I would build in Factorio, with a bus running along here with the basic ingredients, and then passing those out along here to whatever needs them in order to make an intermediate, and then another intermediate, and then pass them into the final row of buildings where you make the output, and then that's passed out and it goes underneath the main bus and is taken off to wherever it's needed. And this is a very, very similar design, and because I am a Factorio player at heart, this was my first instinct for the way I was building, not really taking the third dimension into account other than as a way for the belts to cross over each other. And that's perhaps a little bit of a shame, because maybe I could have done something a bit more interesting. I've not done very much stacking. In fact, if you look across my entire factory, most of it is fairly 2D, and it's only really the belts that are doing the 3D spaghetti. And actually there's some stuff hidden underground, but we'll get back to that. But mostly it's very, very 2D. Now there are a few exceptions, like over here where I've expanded up into the third dimension to put in some extra oil processing here. But mostly everything is very, very flat, and maybe this is something I should try to get away from and try and deliberately build with the third dimension a little bit more in mind. But we'll come back to that a bit later, because I do have some thoughts there. After making the blue and red science, I'm then feeding them into the science labs down here, so that's allowing me to do some science. And then later on I was able to come along here and do the next tier of science pack, which is I think the green science packs coming over here. And once again we've got that same sort of Factorio style layout where we're bringing in resources, and we've got the columns of machines that are all making exactly the same thing, and then passing those out along intermediate belts to be taken into the final set of machines here that are making the actual science packs. And then again over here as well, so another row taking and feeding in for the science as well. And then exactly the same along here. So this is a much larger construction, because we're making the purple science here, which is the most advanced science pack, and that requires 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different inputs to go into it. And you can also see that as I've advanced a bit further, I've got a bit freer with the amount of digging I've been doing, because I found newer and better ways to do that, and also with the amount of foundation I've been putting down, because now foundation is a much, much cheaper resource compared to the way it used to be. So I'm happy to just slap down a huge area of it and then start building on top of it. Whereas over here I was being a little bit more careful with it, because whilst it's not expensive, there wasn't as much of it available. And actually this was also pre one of the updates where foundation took up more space in your inventory because the stacks weren't as big. So this has helped quite a bit, and has made me able to be a little bit more free with both my digging and my building. And actually making the digging a little bit easier has also made me even more two-dimensional, which is kind of ironic, but I'll try and improve on that at some point in the future. So that was science packs, and obviously I didn't build them all at the same time, but I was able to get most of them built up over here. One of them I did build over on the bus, which with hindsight I kind of regret, and that's these green assembly machine 3s over here that would be making the yellow science packs if there were a few more of these energy cells going in. The next phase of construction was then starting to think about oil processing. And that was, well, it started off relatively simple because the machines were quite fast, and you only needed 1 or 2 machines to do everything. And so I built up a lot of my initial oil processing into this rather tight spaghetti area here, and had a handful of machines making basically all of the different end products I needed. But since then I've had to kind of increase that quite a lot because I've not been making remotely enough of things, and that's led to some problems. One of the solutions I found for these problems was to remove the plastic processing and move it all the way over to here. So now we've got a bit more of a sort of a bus style system going on, where we're bringing in the crude oil along the pipe here and then cracking it down into low density Olumite, I think it's called, and then making that into plastic. And we've now got belts and belts of plastic going out, some of them going into an airport here, some of them going off down the belt to go into the main factory. And there's a similar thing happening here. I can't even remember what this one is. Oh yes, this is making the Olumic acid, which is required for lots of the processing further on down the system. So we're making large quantities of that and then shoving it down a pipe over here, or possibly down a pipe over here. I've lost track of which one is which. But the point is, I've made another sort of long line of machines here, and that's working quite nicely and producing things in a much larger quantity. Over here, for another couple of the steps of processing, this is one of the places where I've gone 3D, because we had all of the ingredients I needed down here. I just needed more machines doing the things. And with the pipes, it's actually really easy to go 3D because you can just put in a vertical T-piece of pipe like I've got there and have a pipe shoot off upwards, and you can put in another set of machines doing exactly the same things directly above it. And so this has allowed me to expand quite quickly with the oil processing here in ways that I haven't been able to do with the solids, because making solids go up a level like that would be quite a lot fiddlier. And you can see over here where I've got some ramps going on, it's a little bit awkward. And now there are freight elevators that can transport solid goods up and down, but they're quite bulky and they don't feel quite as nice to put in for this sort of thing. It's not like the elevators in Satisfactory, which fit in basically the same way the pipes do, like this. They're very, very compact. Moving solids vertically in Foundry is quite a bit more space hungry, and therefore I've not done quite as much of it. I think it may be a thing that I'm going to have to start doing in the future, because there's going to be some things that I'm going to need to expand, but so far it's not something I've played with, and maybe that's something I should. Once I had a load of the plastic things working, I then realised that the next stage of the game was to start building these little robot things that you then shoot up into space and sell. And so one of the first set of things I did was over here in sort of kind of crammed in next to the science pack area. And that's producing these light transport drones down here. So once again, we're bringing in a variety of actually fairly elementary resources at this point, because these are the first type of drone. And then they're being made in the same sort of way that you're kind of used to. So we're bringing in copper over here and making it into electronic components. We're bringing in iron here and making it into mechanical components. And then there's some more machines crammed in here on the end, because I didn't build this with expansion in mind, that are making the actual little robot guys. But we've got plenty of those. You can see a red belt is running along here, and it's completely full, and so is the landing pad here. A ship has just landed, so it's filling up at the moment. But this belt is almost fast enough to keep the pad full, and you can see that the ship has just taken off, and there we go, the landing pad is already full again, as you can tell by the fact the belt is clogged up. I then decided there wasn't room for any more of that, so I've moved a little bit further down here, and I've tried to space things out a little bit more, and I started a new bank of machines that goes all the way along here that are making all the different types of little drone guys. And so here we're making the heavy transport drones, and as we can see, this belt isn't quite full, so we're maybe not making those quite quickly enough. Maybe some expansion along there would be a good idea, but the system is mostly full, so that's not doing too badly. Then we're making, I think these guys are light drones, and these are coming through nice and quickly, and then so on and so on as we go further and further down. As you can see, we've got quite a lot of launch pads that are taking all of these drone resources up to the space station to be sold. And these generally work on exactly the same construction system that I was talking about before. So here, for example, we're bringing in iron and steel and making the low tier assembly parts and then the high tier assembly parts, which are then fed out down here, round here, and then combined with some thermalite and some electronics components that are being brought in from somewhere off down that way, because my bus is apparently running backwards at this point, is making the heavy transport drones. And if we look along here, we can tell that these are all running because they've all got smoke coming out of them, so that's great. And then as we go further along, you can see the same sort of thing with the light bots. I've got machines here making the electronic components and the load and the basic components, and then feeding them in here. Only a few of these machines are working, but that's because we've got enough of them at the moment, so that's fine. And at this stage, I was trying to build all of the drones from basic resources. So I was bringing in iron, copper, and steel, and maybe one or two other things. Seems to be some glass going in there, and then making all the intermediates that go into the drones on site, which is why we're making the electronic components here, why we're making the basic components, and we're making basic electronic components here, and we're making basic components to make advanced components over here. So they're all trying to be completely self-contained little units, and that makes a certain amount of sense. I don't hate it as a design, but then I decided that it would actually be a lot easier to then have a larger facility here that's just making electronic components as fast as it possibly can. And it's trying to fill up a green belt, which is extremely difficult, but we do have basically a green belt of copper coming in here, and we're just trying to make as many as we can, and it's still not enough. So this is the downside of trying to make everything in one place. You may run into throughput limitations. However, the throughput limitation does appear to be how fast the green belt can chuck copper into this area. Or actually maybe not, maybe it's the number of machines I've got. So there's a little bit of expansion available there. We could get a little bit more coming through, but we're going to start struggling here, I think, at some point, and I may need to bring in more and more and more copper. But then after that, I started making massive quantities of the advanced components, which are going off in that direction over there. And then we could bring in the bits and pieces needed in order to make vacuum bots without needing to have loads and loads of other sets of machines to make those things specifically for them. And they're fed into a launch pad. And then in theory, it's then easy to make the next type, which is down here. I don't know. Oh, those are screen bots, I think. And all the parts for this are being made elsewhere and just dropped in. So we've got plastic and iron, fine, those are raw ingredients, and green circuits, which are being made miles away, but again, a raw ingredient, and glass. And then we're getting the screen bots out. I don't know what was happening here, but something clearly was, but it's not anymore. And then the next bot type, again, we're bringing in all kinds of pre-made parts in order to make the next type of bots, which is I don't know what was being made here. Oh, this is making maintenance drones. We appear to have a shortage of that. But then yes, all the parts for those are being brought in, and then they're being fed out on the belt like that and going out into the spaceport over here. And actually, despite the fact that we seem to be making them very, very slowly, there's not much demand because this is already full. And the same's true with mining drones and all the way down here. It's the same sort of general idea until we get to the big robots over there. And we'll take a quick look at those because they're the same sort of general idea, except you have some very, very specific intermediates. So this is my farmer robots, and for those you need to make torsos and arms and other arms because you need twice as many arms. And then over here we're making legs and presumably heads. And those are all being fed out on belts from here, and then they're going into the assembly lines, and the assembly lines are a little bit different because as the parts come through for those, you actually build the robot as it goes through here. So we put an arm on like that, and then as it gets to here, the arms will be welded in place, and so on down the route until eventually they get to the end, they get the legs put on, they get painted, and they get loaded into the spaceport to be taken away. These are being made a little bit slowly, but I don't think I've got a huge amount of demand for them, so it's not too bad. But also, unfortunately, I don't think I made this in a very expandable way, because it'd be nice to be able to double this and make this run twice as fast. But there isn't room in this gap here. So I think in hindsight, I should have built these off as two separate rows. Although maybe I could put in a second set of that across here and just rejig what takes what in. Because it looks like, yes, all the machines are running, so we don't have a shortage of parts coming in right now. We just have a shortage of machines making them. So I need more machines to be making arms or whatever it is that I'm limited by at the moment. So that's something that could be improved a little bit. Speaking of improving things a little bit, my bus designs have evolved a bit as we've gone along here. So initially, I decided that, well, we're playing a 3D game, and I don't have a great deal of space along here, although how I can not have a great deal of space when it's an infinite world, I'm not sure. So I thought, yeah, let's stack all the buses vertically. So you can see here, for example, we're breaking out the thermalite plates, and then they're being taken down a little spiral of ramp here and going in where they're needed. And this was sort of okay to start with, but then I started running multiple belts side by side so it didn't get too tall, and then the belt started to get in the way, and so you can see the main steel belt that's coming along here has had to kink out a bit and then go back in again over there, and it's all got a bit horrible. And I decided I didn't like it, so I went over to a sort of a slightly more Factorio-style horizontal bus over here, where we have our belts coming across in pairs, with a gap, and then a pair of belts and a gap. If I put in some more belts along here, it'll make it a little bit more obvious how things are set up. So now you can see how I've got two belts and then a gap, and two belts and a gap, and two belts and a gap, and so on. And that means it's really easy to then put in one of these splitters into the gap from whichever belt it is, and then have a ramp going up and a belt going across to take out the stuff to wherever it's needed. Now I could do it slightly differently. I could have had these belts solidly all the way across, and then had whichever belt would have been in the way of the splitter going down and then coming back up again. But I can imagine that if I did that, it would make it very, very awkward when I wanted to bring out two adjacent components, and I just wouldn't be able to fit stuff in. Whereas as it is, I can fit in adjacent components being brought out at the same time like that, and we can feed in all of these different things over to here very, very easily. And I think I'm happy with this system. I don't regret doing it like this, and I probably wouldn't change it if I wanted to doing it again. Or maybe I would. Maybe I'd try and get another vertical bus going, but you just end up with too many spirals getting in the way of each other, and it'd be a bit fiddly and a bit awkward. And so I think this system seems to work better. But if you're an experienced Foundry player, let me know how you do it in the comments. At this stage of the game, my mines are all generally underground, because early on in the game, your first sort of starter patches, yes, they're poking up through the surface, so you can find them easily and start digging from them. Really, really easy, really nice way to get started. But then as you get further into the game, well, your first coal patch tends to be underground, and then any of your later ore patches will tend to be a bit more buried, a bit harder to get at. And so here we've got, well, this is one of my coal mines. This one is actually all the way out down at the south end of my bus. So this is actually quite handily placed because it's really nearby and it's lasted me quite well. We haven't destroyed the entire thing yet. This is about my third iron patch, but there's still it's still going quite well. There's a nice big block here, as you can see. And that's all getting unloaded into the drone miners along here and then emptied out along these belts. And I'm doing a lot of my processing underground just because it seems nice and easy to do it that way. And it keeps things out of the way and it allows me to be a little bit more three-dimensional, which is always fun. Of course, because ore patches keep running out, that means that assuming you don't want to move your smelting and processing facilities around too much, you end up having to dig some quite long tunnels to transport your ore around. And at the moment, that's done through belts, as you can see here. So I've got 4 yellow belts, which at the time seemed like an enormous amount of iron, being transported from the mining facility over to here. And okay, one of them disappeared down underground there, and I believe that goes down to steel processing. And then in here, we've got these two being fed in, where it's then crushed by these crushers here. And then the crushed ore can then be fed into smelters. And we're doing this because if you crush and then smelt, you get 50% more iron out at the end over here. So that means we can then have these green belts taking it away, and that's supplying the factory quite nicely. There is also an additional belt, as you can see, going off into an adjacent room over here, where we've got the same sort of system happening again. So we're producing even more iron, and there's a lot of it being pumped through. We get through a lot of iron in this factory. On the lower floor, if we can get down there, which we probably can't, or maybe we can. Yes, there we can. There is, again, more processing going on down here. So we're crushing down some iron, but then there's also coal being brought in from this freight elevator, and that's being pumped through here and crushed down into crushed coal, which can then be fed in here, and we can make steel out of it. So this is producing most of the steel the factory requires, but it's a much more expensive process and much slower. So we only have part of a yellow belt coming through here, and I do feel like I need to expand this, but I'm also not sure if I have enough iron coming in to actually do the expansion. And so this is potentially going to be a bit of a problem. I may need to just build even more, but that means I need to mine more iron and I need to put in more smelting, and it's a whole process that just expands faster than I'm really ready to keep up with. The next tier of mining, which does get you a lot more resource out, is something that I've only just started to play with. And this is using vein mining, and unfortunately there aren't any convenient veins nearby, close to the factory, so we're going to have fly over here a little bit. But you know what, I'll speed this up for you so you don't have to watch me flying for ages. And resource veins are enormous patterns well underneath the ground, which I can see with the ore scanner when I do this. And you can see if you can see the sheer scale of the thing going away down there underground. And you get these specific points where you're able to tap it. And so if I drop into the original mine shaft here, we can go and have a look at one of these. And at the stage of game I'm at the moment, I have the technology to build vein miners, but only to dig into the specific points where where the copper is very close to the edge. And if I go up here, I can follow in the side of the vein miner here, and this thing has extended quite a long way since I put it in, and is now sending these little mine carts back and forth, which is absolutely adorable. But that's digging out into the copper face over here, and gradually extending itself forwards as it digs up the copper. Now there is a fracking system that will come up in the future, which I haven't got to yet, but that will allow me to then apparently get an infinite amount of copper out of here, I believe by then just tapping the entire vein itself, rather than just the specific very coppery patches on the surface. And these can produce a decent amount of copper output, and along here I've got several of these vein miners, all feeding into the same set of elevators over here. And these are being used to take that copper ore up to the surface, where it can be then further processed. And yes, I've got another 2 vein miners here working in parallel, because it's a bigger vein that they're able to dig from, and that's working. Yeah, it's working nicely. Back up at surface level, that copper then pours out of the top end of the freight elevator, and it's flowing through nearly at full speed on those belts. And this is what I meant about the freight elevators being kind of big and chunky, and therefore I don't really feel right using them just for taking stuff up a short distance. And so if I do expand this copper smeltery here to actually use the upper level that I built at the time because I thought I was going to need more, then I will probably still continue to use just ramp belts like this because it feels quicker and easier. Although that said, with the amount of copper that's coming out of here, it would probably be okay to put in a second freight elevator that just finishes at the upper level and go, well, that's going to be the right amount of copper, the amount of copper that we're going to need. And then that copper can pour out over here, where it's then being turned into electronic components, which are then being combined with some plastic that's being brought in by aircraft, which seems rather inefficient, but we haven't got trains yet, so for now it's going to have to be aircraft. And then that is creating massive quantities of green circuits that are then being fed over into this landing pad in order to allow them to be taken away by a different aircraft. And looking at the way these machines are working, I'm wondering if I should be upgrading these belts here. No, it seems to be full. So we clearly have more than enough construction capacity over here. So I don't think I really need to worry about it too much. Over here in a small dammed off area next to a lake. And in case you're curious, on the map we're just looking at the copper mine down here, and now we come up to another copper mine up here. This one's a bit closer to the factory, as you can see. And so here we're digging up another large quantity of copper, and that's disappearing off down a pair of green belts there, off down another tunnel. And this was after I discovered the boring machine, which enables you to very, very quickly and easily dig 5x5 tunnels. And that makes this sort of tunneling and boring much, much easier, and makes it much more practical to move your resources around by underground belts. This then emerges in the site of a previous copper mine, which is now completely depleted, but because there was a really good seam of copper here until I used all of it up, I have an enormous copper smelting facility right outside it, which is providing all of the copper required for the rest of the factory. And at the moment we can see that these belts all seem to be moving on and off, but they're not moving too steadily. So I think we're not completely, I think we probably just about have enough copper coming through here. Perhaps I should have tried to build up a 6-to-6 balancer in here just to make sure everything was all happy and balanced and so on. But this seems to be working okay, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. That copper then goes through a tunnel under the mine along here. It comes out about behind this wall here, but then it goes down a set of freight elevators that takes it even further underground, and it's then brought along under the main mall area, and then it pops up from a load of holes in the ground over here and is then taken to wherever it needs to go. And this area around here is getting very tight, cramped, and just a bit awkward. And so I think at some point I may have to do some improvements and just sort of redesign this area, rethink it a bit, because there are too many different resources going in too many different directions around here, and it's all a bit chaotic and spaghetti. But that'll be something we'll look at in one of the streams. I think there's not a great deal more to say now as we fly over the plastic area. There's a massive solar power station over here that's producing most of the power the factory needs, although not at 5:30 in the morning. It's a little bit too difficult at that sort of time. And then over here on the other side of the river we have additional steam power where we're producing emergency backup power. So in theory we run off the solar and the battery packs that are over there with them, and then when the batteries start to run low, then these turbines over here will kick in, as they have at the moment, rather unfortunately. So apparently we're still not actually producing and storing enough power. We also have a system over here that is taking in coal dust and water and making a fluid that can be pumped down to the geothermal plants that are way down underground. And I'm trying to use these things all in the most efficient way possible. So we start off using the solar as much as possible, then we'll kick in with the geothermal power as necessary, and if those two combined aren't enough, only then do we let these machines over here kick in. And if we go down and have a look at this battery, you can see the battery is down to 16% charge, which is why all the machines have kicked in, because I've got them set to run on certain charge levels. But I don't think we ever actually managed to charge the batteries up to full, so a bit more work, a bit more solar is needed before we can be really happy with this system. And so that covers the factory as it is at the moment, from the starting position over here with the science up in the top left, the mall area over here to the what was originally bottom right, and oil processing over here in the bottom left. Then we've got all the robot drone construction going off down here, way off to the south, with the spaceports to go with it. Oil processing in the middle here, as I said, expanded oil processing over here. Then solar generation, got a little bit of oil mining going on here. Oh, and it looks like I put in a new glass production facility over here. I forgot about that. And that's digging up from a large patch of mineral rock and then crushing it and cooking it and turning it into glass that can be fed out for everything that needs it. Additional oil harvesting down here, and the power stuff I was talking about over here as well. With some additional underground pipes going off to the geothermal bits like that. Resources now coming from, well, we've got plastic coming from here. There's coal coming from way up here at the moment, which is kind of ridiculous. Teluxite from here, which is a sort of silicon for more advanced computer parts bit. And additional copper down, all the way down here, that's coming out of a vein mine, so it will last forever, and that's where we're producing those green circuits that we looked at. So the factory is growing and spreading. We've now, from the coal mine up there in the north to the copper mine down here in the south, that's covering a big old area. And I'm really looking forward to them introducing trains so that I can get things being transported over those distances a bit more quickly, and then maybe go and think about having more vein mine systems set up, because I think that would be quite nice. I'll also then be able to come up with a bit more of a town-based design for my processing, so I can have ores being brought in by train and processed in a central area and then taken off to wherever they're needed. I've kind of got that at the moment, but a lot of it's fed by belts because I don't really trust the aircraft to transport the resources around as fast as I would need them for basic things like copper copper and iron and so on, I feel like they're going to be required in such large numbers that aircraft are either not going to be able to keep up, or I'd have to have so many of them that it would get a little bit silly. But I'm pinning my hopes on trains, which should be introduced in the next big update, which I'm very much looking forward to. And I think that brings us nicely to the end of the episode, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll be back streaming some more of this on Wednesday, every Wednesday at 8 PM UK time, so come along and join me for that. I'm also streaming Factorio Planetary Pioneers, which is a massive mod pack consisting of more than 20 planets and more than 30 science packs, 5 players, and a lot of frustration and headaches and just general massive oversized builds. That's every Monday, 7:30 PM UK time, and the videos come out every Thursday and Friday, so please make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on any of that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.